One valuable thing was accomplished during that winter, 1917–18, and that was the teaching of English to men of foreign birth. There were thousands of foreigners in Camp Upton, many of whom could speak little or no English when they arrived. The 304th and, indeed, all the artillery regiments, had perhaps fewer than some of the other organizations, but there were enough to make it worthwhile to establish schools. For those men whose commanding officers decided that their ignorance of the language interfered with the proper performance of their military duties, the classes were made compulsory. There were experienced school teachers in the regiment. These men and others, of perhaps less experience but of equal desire to help, took hold of the classes and accomplished remarkable results in overcoming the difficulties, and especially the diffidence, of shy but eager Italians, Greeks and Russian Jews. We even had a school in early English and 75 men learned to read and write. One G Company man persistently cut classes. A non-com was sent to bring him in, but failed to do so. I sought him out, and on his own confession that he couldn't write and could barely read, gave him a 15-minute talk on the value of an education. It was a fine talk. I waited for a reply. "Hell, chaplain," he said, "I am going over there to shoot Germans, not to write letters to them." We had some very queer characters at Camp Doniphan. One that I especially recall was Haney, known as the Gold Brick. Haney was from somewhere along the Ozark Trail. He was one of those fellows who didn't know nothing and didn't want to know nothing, didn't never go nowhere and didn't want to go nowhere. If the war could have been won by lying in bed all the time except when busy stowing away a good portion of army grub, Haney would have been a great factor in winning the war. Whenever there was marching to be done he had sore feet or a game leg. Whenever there was digging to be done he had sore arms or a lame back. But I never saw the time when mess call blew that he was not somewhere near the head end of the line with all of his eating apparatus in good repair. We finally got together and conspired to get Haney a discharge on a physical disability certificate, although there was not one thing wrong with him, unless it was hookworm. He was happy to go as we were to get rid of him, and he doubtless sits in front of his shack in the Ozarks to this day telling the natives of the wonderful part he took in canning the Kaiser. The fellow who sat across from me at my squad table used to be called the Chow Hound. He never used a knife or fork to eat. He ate using 2 tablespoons, just scooping it down with both hands, dribbling down the front of his shirt. I asked him why he didn't use a knife or fork, and he said, "Pappy always said, if you can't eat it with a spoon, 'tain't fit and to eat." He turned out to be the most decorated man in the company, very religious, and absolutely without fear. I must not forget to mention a soldier everyone called General, on account of his being a general nuisance. He was a Russian boy, well-built, a good-looking good-natured kid, but always in hot water, always doing something wrong and the target for many a good-natured jibe. We were lining up for inspection one day, and while waiting for the inspector were given at ease. We were allowed to talk, smoke and move one foot out of position to rest us from standing at attention. General had come into possession of a flashy cigarette case and was proud of it. He took it from his pocket, pressed a button, and enjoyed watching it open with a snap. After a careful survey he selected a cigarette that met his approval. One of the boys said, "Say, General, give me a cigarette." "Buy your own cigarettes," snapped General and put the case back in his pocket. He reached for a match, first in one pocket, then in another, then back to the first again. The boys saw what was up, and the General's smile began to fade. They began to pass cigarettes around, and blow smoke in General's face. Finally he asked someone to give him a match. "Buy your own matches," they chorused. He begged for a light and finally for even a drag, but he got nothing. General's real name was Marion Stankowick. He was killed in France by a man in his own company named Cox. Cox heard a noise while the men were in the trenches and went wild. He began throwing hand grenades out of the trench and killed poor old General. If the Allies had expected an immediate flood of U.S. troops into the European war, they were sorely disappointed. A trickle of regulars and National Guardsmen would arrive before the end of 1917, but the vast majority of the hundreds of thousands of draftees and recruits were destined to spend the fall and winter months training in the camps around the U.S. The unvarnished truth was, the United States was woefully unprepared to take an active part in the war. The War College Division on February 27, 1917, had asked the 5 supply departments of the Army how long it would take to obtain supplies for 1 million men. The reply should have been a warning: 9 to 12 months to procure clothing, 12 months for small arms and equipment, but 30 months to manufacture sufficient field artillery and 18 months to procure the necessary machine guns. Estimated delays for other equipment ranged from 6 to 12 months. The flood of troops strained the supply of available equipment. A shortage of rifles saw some recruits drilling with wooden sticks. Hand grenades, machine guns, artillery pieces were all in short supply. Indeed, artillery was so scarce that the French would finally supply virtually all of the guns used by the American Expeditionary Force in France. All of us old rookies had visions of being rushed to the firing line with orders to break through, push on to Berlin and capture the Kaiser. We figured they'd shoot us across on the next boat. But we guessed wrong. Instead of sending us to war, they sent us to school, to learn how to be soldiers, I guess. Now we had to get up at the sound of reveille. At first it was hard for me to get up at 5:30. It usually took about 3 minutes to get dressed and fall out on the company street for checking up. It sure was funny when the top sergeant would go around and lift up the overcoats of some soldiers and find some of the fellows in their underwear, or as the saying was, being caught with their pants down. These fellows who were caught would draw some sort of punishment of extra guard duty or detail work of policing the company's camp. On being dismissed, we would fall out to our tents, clean up and make our beds. Some of the boys would go right back to sleep for another half or 3/4 of an hour. Every morning after breakfast fatigue call sounded and we had to police our quarters and the company street. The next formation would be for calisthenics, our morning exercise. This always turned out to be a humorous affair. When we were ordered to hop, straddle, and jump, many of the fellows would be going up while others were coming down. They looked like butterflies taking off, which was upsetting to the instructors who would keep the entire outfit overtime trying to get everyone coordinated. It finally ended up that some men were called aside and made to go through the exercise until they moved all together. This was called the awkward squad. Rifles were issued to us along with ammunition belts filled with 30.06 cartridges. Also issued were a first aid packet, canteen, mess kit, bacon can and a condiment can with sugar, coffee, salt and pepper. New wool blankets were issued along with a shelter, half, which was 1/2 of a pup tent as they were called. A canvas backpack and a rain poncho were included, and each squad was assembled and instructed how to roll blankets into the pack. This turned out to be quite a problem as the blankets had to be folded just the right way or they hung down in the pack. The expression given to this lack of perfection was sad sack. Unless the blankets were wrapped perfectly, they had to be pulled apart and packed over. Some of the men never did get the hang of wrapping a neat pack and it would fall apart when worn. That called for extra duty, working in the kitchen or cleaning the latrines. In 1918 many infantry divisions, particularly those formed from the drafted contingents, were armed with the Model 1917 bolt-action rifle. A compromise weapon which enabled our manufacturers to use machinery already set up to turn out rifles for the British forces. The 1917 rifle was the English Enfield changed to permit the use of United States government ammunition. It was a reliable arm, but heavier, clumsier and less accurate than our own Springfield. Naturally, the soldiers themselves were quick to appreciate the difference, and, later in France, it was no uncommon sight, when men of a new division passed a battlefield salvage dump, to see them run to a stack of scarred and rusty Springfields and leave a new but despised Enfield in exchange for a rifle of an older but better pattern. Due to the total lack of horses, wooden substitutes were used. These were built by the men, and consisted of long, hollow, wooden cylinders mounted on 4 sticks. Small pegs fastened on the top of the cylinders served to designate the pommel and cantle of the saddle. Under the tutelage of Lieutenant Burke, we executed the commands, stand to horse, prepare to mount, and mount. The last command was particularly difficult to execute, for some of the horses were built higher than others, and since none of them had stirrups or saddles, considerable discomfort was experienced by the uninitiated, who jumped high and fell heavily in the hard, wooden seats. Other movements of the cavalry drill were practiced as low reach, about face, etc. With so much other simulated work going on for lack of proper facilities, it is a matter for self-congratulation that we were not compelled to groom imaginary manies and polish imaginary hoofs by the numbers. On the night of August 13 a telegram from the office of the Commanding General, Eastern Department, to Captain Robert J. Gill, Commanding Officer, 3rd County, CAC, was received, ordering him to report to Governor's Island. New York. Major Booth, Adjutant, greeted Captain Gill and said, "Captain, I want you to form a trench mortar battery." This battery, designated the 117th Trench Mortar Battery, is to become a part of the 42nd U.S. Infantry Division, which is being mobilized for immediate service in France. "Very well, sir," said Captain Gill. "Are there any questions?" asked Major Booth. "May I ask, sir, what a trench mortar is?" was the captain's question. "Damned if I know, but you will soon find out," replied the major. So the days went on. The men learned to throw grenades and to use the bayonet, to shoot the army rifle and to dig trenches. Especially the latter. They dug trenches and dug more trenches. They braided barbed wire by the rod. And then saw the artillery cheerfully blow up both wire and trenches in 10 minutes. I got an opportunity to get home once, and it was nice to see my folks, my brothers and sisters, and my girl. Many of us had no money to get home, but the conductor on the train would take our names and what outfit we belonged to, plus our serial numbers, and said we could settle with the railroad when we got paid. Seems as though the railroad got patriotic, because none of us heard any more from it. When I left home that time, I told my folks that I might be home once more, but I did not know. There were many tears shed, but once I got out and onto the train again and met other soldiers returning to camp, we helped each other to overcome this feeling by singing and exchanging experiences. Once back to camp we had no time to think about home or to get lonesome. On Tuesday, September 25, 1917, the inevitable happened. The bugler blew, "To arms," and the sergeants were running up and down the company street hollering, "Everybody up! Start rolling packs!" Well, the time was up. We took our bed sacks and emptied them and started rolling packs. Everybody was excited. Barracks bags were packed and placed in the center of the street, and the trucks came along and took them away. We marched to a waiting train, where all shades were drawn, guards placed at the doors, and no talking allowed, and in a few minutes we were on our way, the quickest move yet. Late one afternoon our captain, Barry M. Whitaker, formed the company and, with great solemnity, announced, "This company is going to France. We are going right away. Is there a man here who does not want to go?" No one replied. He commanded, "Dismissed." I have often wondered if that company did not have a pack of silent liars. Before leaving Texarkana, one of the men put his rifle to an unintended use. He went into one of the toilets of the depot and shot himself through the head. This trouble might have been saved this despondent youngster had he only known with what willingness any German would have done the same for him. Peculiar as it may seem, a suicide in the company created little comment. The men took it as a matter of course and the boy and the incident were soon forgotten.